The gentleman from Missouri is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to 3807 H.R. 3807 as amended. Here we are today to discuss yet another spending bill that will add to our nation's debt and deficit and continue to spike inflation. Another bill that creates a new government program without regard to the effectiveness or management of existing programs. Another bill that has been rushed to the floor without a committee markup or a CBO score. In fact, the latest draft of this legislation was sent out last Friday night and has been amended since. This is not how we should legislate, Mr. Speaker. We must do a better job for our nation's small businesses that create 2 out of every 3 new jobs in America. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's experiencing deja vu by my colleagues' agenda to spend now and think later. This agenda is not working for Main Street America. The Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council conducted a recent poll of small business owners and found that only 5% of small business owners report Congress's policies are helping the economy and small business like mine. Just 5%. That means 95%, Mr. Speaker, don't like what's going on. And while we are sitting here in Washington deciding whether to spend more money for certain industries, Main Street is experiencing price shocks that have not been felt in over 40 years. 40 years. Inflation is burning through our nation at a rapid pace. From food and shelter to gas and energy, prices in every category of life are increasing exponentially with no end in sight. The Consumer Price Index stands at 7.9% annually, and the Producer Price Index, which is the wholesale price index, is now at 10%. That makes the short-term inflation look pretty bleak from the standpoint that the wholesale producer's price index is 10, the CPI is 7.9. We're going to have some more inflation here. So higher prices, there's no doubt about it. American families are feeling the pain, Mr. Speaker. Businesses feel this pain, and the nation's smallest firms are suffering. In fact, small business owners are reporting that their number one problem is inflation. The second most pressing issue for small business is the price of gas. These price shocks hit them every single day. Yet today we are considering injecting more money into the system, which will simply fuel the fire of inflation. There's no doubt that small businesses suffer from the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdowns that shut down Main Street. It has been just over 2 years since the CARES Act was signed into law. Since that time, we have spent approximately $6 trillion as a nation to fight COVID-19. Small businesses alone have received $1.2 trillion in forgivable loans and other grants. I'm proud of the bipartisan relief that Congress provided small businesses throughout this pandemic, including the Paycheck Protection Program, which supported many small businesses, including restaurants, in keeping their businesses afloat and employees on the payroll. The goal then was to quickly get dollars out the door to support our nation's job creators during this time of crisis. But now our nation as a whole has learned much more about this pandemic. We've learned how to safely go about our lives. This bill is a disingenuous attempt to posture to small businesses by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. If Democrats were serious about helping restaurants and small businesses, they would have called for an end to the ever-changing mandates and lockdowns that force so many businesses to close their doors. They would have accepted my amendment during committee to adequately fund this program from the start. They would have considered my bill when it was introduced in July, the Entree Act, which responsibly refills the restaurant revitalization program and is fully paid for, which this bill we're discussing today is not. When the government attempts to solve problems without the input of small businesses, they create more problems, Mr. Speaker. Have my Democrat counterparts on the other side ever asked a small business owner if they are now capable of opening and operating safely? Have they asked them whether they can now unlock their doors, turn on their lights, and protect their workers? Have they ever asked them if they are able to now welcome customers and the community members back into their storefronts carefully? I have, and the answer from small business owners is a resounding yes. Small businesses are some of the most innovative and nimble enterprises in America. They can pivot quickly, and most importantly, they can adapt to any situation with speed. They're the entrepreneurs of our country that drive our country. They can figure out how to slice the bread thinner. They know how to do this. We saw this over the last 2 years. At this time, small businesses need the freedom to operate independently without Washington operating over them. We must end the COVID economy of government handouts. Furthermore, this bill creates yet another new grant program at the SBA. The SBA, in my judgment, is incapable of operating grant programs. Let's briefly examine how they have performed over the last 2 years, Mr. Speaker. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, also known as EIDL, is filled with fraud and identity theft issues. This is per the IG, the Inspector General, and there's a report. And the SBA is a black hole when it comes to answering questions for our constituent businesses. We've all had businesses in our district struggle with getting information for their grant application. Frankly, this direct lending and direct grant program from the SBA has been a disaster. 30% fraud rate in it. That's the IG report numbers. Yet the SBA continues to defer EIDL payments. The second grant program was the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program. The SVOG was signed into law in December 2020. Disappointingly, and after long delays, the SBA attempted to launch this program in April, 4 months later. My colleagues and I sent multiple letters and letters to the SBA regarding this delay. The night before it went live, SBA's Inspector General sent in a warning signal. He said, SBA, you're not ready to do this. You're not up and running yet. But did they listen? Of course not. They went ahead anyway, and within hours, the whole program crashed. The program then took 2 more months to launch. This is unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. We've got to do a better job than this. They have to do a better job than this. The last program was the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. I'd like to remind everyone that this program was woefully underfunded by my Democrat colleagues. However, more shocking was the fact that congressional Democrats, the Biden administration, and the SBA prioritized certain businesses over others. The RRF program was fundamentally unfair. They picked winners and losers with American taxpayer dollars. It was so bad, the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals declared this program unconstitutional, Mr. Speaker. They declared the whole program unconstitutional. The court's majority opinion stated that the SBA injected explicit racial and ethnic preferences into the priorities. Enough is enough. If you judge the future by the past, as my dad once said, it is clear the SBA is unable to properly and prudently manage grant programs and safeguard American taxpayer dollars. Not only does the SBA have a disastrous past of administering grant programs, but any new dollars flowing will add fuel to the inflation fire. I want to be clear, this bill is supposedly paid for by recovered funds. At best, this is an IOU, Mr. Speaker. It is not a real or immediate offset. I agree that we need to track down and hold fraudsters accountable, and I applaud that process. I support it entirely. But this process takes time, and it's not going to get all of those dollars back. For example, according to testimony provided by SBA's Inspector General at the hearing in January, the total recoveries by this office in fiscal year 2021 was $4.2 billion. The same testimony in collaboration with Secret Service, the Inspector General reports that they have seized another $1 billion in the EIDL program. And lastly, and again according to the IG, financial institutions have returned approximately $3.1 billion in financial fraud funding. That's not near enough to cover the $55 billion that this program wants to spend. Now more than ever, small businesses need to escape the overbearing reach of the federal government. If we want to help small businesses, then we need to stop this out-of-control spending. We should prioritize lowering taxes so small business owners and their workers can keep more of their hard-earned money, and we must reduce regulations that bog down businesses and paperwork with compliance costs. I would argue that the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act is the reason we have the good economy we have today, because we continue to allow the business and individuals to keep their hard-earned dollars and invest them as they see fit. Where if we tax them to death, those dollars come out of the system, and suddenly we limit their ability to drive our economy. We simply need to move on from this COVID economy. In my judgment, this is an irresponsible bill. I urge my colleagues to oppose it. Mr. Speaker, this is about economic independence. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentlewoman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 1 minute to the distinguished House Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer of Maryland.